Today on Rates and Barrels, we break down the National League, picking division winners, wild cards, and making our awards predictions. Let's go. Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Tuesday, March 24th. Derek VanRiper here with Eno Sarris. Lots to get to on this episode, breaking down each division in the NL, making some regular predictions. Bold predictions were in the episode just before this one, depending on where you listen and watch this show. Let's get to some news you should know before we get to our NL East breakdown. Eno, you made a bold prediction that the Atlanta Braves would not make the playoffs again in 2026, and it's because of the injuries that are piling up, and we didn't even know this one was a problem. Spencer Strider is opening the season on the IL with an oblique injury.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. You know, his velo hasn't quite gotten back. His shapes haven't quite gotten back to where he used to be in terms of when he was that young stud that was just blowing away the league. And now we have an injury that reminds us that even once somebody fixes their elbow with Tommy John surgery, there are still other ways they can hurt themselves. I mean, it's sort of the Tyler Glasnow thing. It's like, I know what now? What hurts now? I think there was one of my favorites was, general body soreness is one of my favorites. Just like, I don't feel good. But I think there was a strained butt once for Carl Pavano that I don't know. It just made me laugh.
Strained glute would be the technical term, Dr. Eno.
Right. I'm Dr. Eno. The replacement, it looks like, will be Jose Suarez, who had an okay spring. He's kind of a ground ball lefty. I would rather see Didier Fuentes, who made the opening day roster, or J.R. Ritchie, who's in the minors, than Jose Suarez myself. Maybe because this is maybe they think this is going to be a short-term thing for Spencer Strider. Maybe they're just going to go with Suarez, who may go to the bullpen after. I don't really understand it. I guess the thing is Didier Fuentes only had 57 innings last year, and so you can't really pencil him in to be like 120, 130 inning starter for the whole season. So they're going to have to massage his numbers anyway. J.R. Ritchie, though, I feel like he could just come up and pitch for them. So it mirrors the Carmen Mlodzinski over Hunter Barco decision that happened in Pittsburgh a little bit, I think. And I wonder if it's just safety, if it's risk averseness, if they just think that Suarez and Mlodzinski are, major league starters and they're at least sort of fives at, and we don't know what J.R. Ritchie is and we don't know what Didier Fuentes is yet. So maybe that's the decision-making process that went on in Pittsburgh and Atlanta.
It could be. I think with Fuentes, we saw 75 and 2/3 innings back in 2024. So if you want to use that as your baseline of what you're doing the increase from for a workload, you probably land somewhere at like 115 to 120 as the max they'd want to put on his arm over the course of the season. But I think when you've piled up as many injuries in the rotation as Atlanta has already, you have to start thinking about the possibility of using up those innings at the beginning of the season, tapering him down, maybe using him as a short reliever later on, and just saying it's okay if we run out of innings later because we need to be in a position to make the playoffs. We need pitching to be good enough now.
And we're going to get Hurston Waldrop and Spencer Schwellen back at some point. So, maybe just use them at the beginning of the season. I like that. And then J.R. Ritchie, dude, he threw 140 innings last year. He's ready to go, man. Maybe they just think that Suarez is the best pitcher right now. I mean, that's another way to say it. And when I look at Suarez, I see like a decent changeup and curveball and iffy fastballs, but maybe just enough where it's the fastballs are just average-ish, below average, and the secondaries are good. He doesn't have a great history of command, but maybe they just think he's the best pitcher.
He's also out of options, which is really important.
Yeah,
to think
he's
about.
going to be on the roster for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, as you try and figure out roster mechanics and avoiding having to put guys through waivers and all of that. I mean, given the needs they have right now, anyone that can give them length is going to get a look in Atlanta here in the first part of the season. But this flows nicely into our NL East breakdown. Once again, looking at the PECOTA projections from Baseball Prospectus, I'm somewhat surprised to see Atlanta at the top of the division by a very slim margin. 89.3 wins is the projected total. The Mets at 89, the Phillies at 85. I think most people expect this to be a very tight three-team race all season, so I think PECOTA is dead on, of course, with those three teams being clearly above Miami at 74.1 and Washington down at 67. I do just think we start with a really simple question. If you've already ruled out Atlanta as a playoff team, who do you like better between the Mets and Phillies to come out on top of this division?
I'm going to give the Mets the division. I think that people look at last year and they think, oh, that must be the true talent of the Mets last year. And then they look at the moves and they say, oh, they must have gotten worse, and I disagree with both of those things. I think that the Mets were a little bit unlucky last year. I think that the way that the season ended was there's some part of that was luck. So what if they were an 85 true talent win team last year, or 86? And I think they got a little better. So I think that's why you see PECOTA says, they're the second best team by 0.3 wins. By the way, I would love to see a 0.3 win.
I'd love to also. It'd be great.
So if you round those like you should, there is very little daylight between. I guess the reason they show you the decimals, why is Atlanta in first? It's because they have that extra 0.3 projection. But I think it's a virtual tie at the top there. And like I said in my bold predictions, the New York Mets have the best pitching depth in baseball, at least by projections. And I think also by general sort of feeling around the league. I mean, to have somebody like Jonah Tong, to have Sean Manaea in the bullpen and on the major league roster that can maybe give you some length out of the bullpen, to have Jonah Tong and Christian Scott in the minor leagues ready to go, I think that's really top talent. I think it's either Atlanta or Boston that has the best minor league depth in the starting rotation. I think that matters. Over the course of the season, you get around 200, 250 innings out of your 5 through 10 starters. And if the Mets have the best there, I think that's going to be meaningful for them.
Yeah, I think for as much as the Phillies have poured resources into their current group of starters, I think their depth would be the big concern if you're trying to do a tail of the tape between those two teams on that front, where if both rotations stay mostly healthy, it's hard not to look at the Phillies and say they're a notch better right now, even with the addition of Freddie Peralta, even with pretty lofty expectations for Nolan McLean, and even with a lot of trust in a guy like Kodai Senga coming off a big spring and actually putting the pieces back together this year. I'm curious, too, just the gap by the projections in actual WAR among starters. It's still pretty narrow. So it's the Phillies 16.4, Mets 12.4. That's wider than I expected, because I think, as you mentioned, the depth will be more of a factor than the projections likely expect it to be. So I would not be surprised if that edge shrinks.
Yeah. I wonder if, you do use depth charts, and they do at BP and Fangraphs know that, you use this many, but there is a human element here. That's the human element in these projections, is that they are powered by depth charts. And those depth charts are usually tweaked by humans. If they're not, then they're just a projection of playing time, which can have its own issues. So playing time is the real way that things can get screwed up in here. And what that means is someone is looking at the Mets rotation and trying to decide how much injury possibility there is and assigning innings. And so, that's where the chaos comes in. And, as much as we try to make projections just about the numbers, there is a human element to this. The other thing I think about when I look at this division is just that I think Miami and Washington are already showing signs of changing things really quickly. This has been sort of an ongoing theme over the last week on this podcast, is talking about how Miami and Washington are willing to break things and change things and do things quickly. And Washington is really upping the amount of information they're giving their players. They've got a trajectory for the first time. They're using that for framing, for chasing, for getting ready for ball games. Miami is calling pitches from the dugout and doing some obviously different things when it comes to the stuff of their relievers. So their pitching coaching has been taken up a notch. So what I think, if I have a bold, or we're not supposed to be bold, but I'm just pushing what I think this is true. I think this is true, which is I don't think 3 teams are going to come out of this division. That's where the basis of my Atlanta bold pick is. And so I don't want to make the Atlanta bold pick my regular pick. I am going to. I realize that there's an essence of boldness to it, but I don't actually think it's that bold, because what I'm saying is Miami and Washington are not going to lose 100 games. I don't even know if they're going to lose 90 games each. And if they don't lose 90 games each, those wins come off of the top. And if they actually play Atlanta, New York, and Philadelphia to, a standstill in some ways, Miami or Washington is going to be a giant killer at some point. I think that could totally, that's the way I see it coming down the stretches. Atlanta, New York, and Philadelphia are in it. They go to a big series in Miami or Washington, and something surprising happens, and somebody from the Central sneaks in.
Yeah, I think what we sometimes lose sight of is, like, for teams that are rebuilding, how much worse are they going to get at the trade deadline? And how does that impact the contending teams? And in the case of Miami, we've had Sandy Alcantara trade rumors for more than a year now. So I think when you look at that roster, he's the guy that would be most likely to get traded in July if he's pitching well and they're not within reach of a playoff spot. But pitching is the strength of that organization, right? I was talking in our bold predictions episode about how much I like the quality all around him, between Yuri Perez and Max Meyer and Robbie Snelling and Thomas White. So even if they trade Sandy Alcantara, like, they're still going to be pesky in the final 2 months of the season. And if they're good, maybe they just keep them and continue making a push, and maybe they end up becoming a surprise wildcard team. The playoff odds are 6.5%. So it's a long shot from the start. They're clearly in that rebuilding sort of mode. But when you have pitching as good as Miami's, we've seen it pop before, where they exceed expectations, they're great at run prevention, and they're just a bat or two away from actually being a dangerous last team into the postseason sort of clubs. And I'm with you on the Washington side too. I've been generally impressed by what they've put together in a short amount of time in that front office, the way they've changed the culture. I just think the pitching is, despite all of the improvements, despite all the improvements to the coaching and the process around it, the pitching is going to be a problem. Their pitching is going to get beat up. They're projected to allow 793 runs. So if there is a 90-plus loss team in the division, I think Washington is that team, even though they're going to do a lot of interesting things and probably continue to churn the roster to their liking.
Yeah, I think Kate Cavalli is going to take us a step forward, and I think we're going to see them sort through some of these veterans. Zach Littell is one of those weird pitchers. He just gets a $3 million deal with a $12 million like mutual option. Like it's a $7 million deal somehow, because there's a buyout on the. It's one of the weirder deals I've ever seen, and the incentive structure is almost such that the Nationals don't want to pitch him, because every time they pitch him, it costs them money. Like it's one of those innings pitch projections. But again, if he makes their team a little bit better, then I think they'll pitch him. My point, that is your point, that to your point about how much are they going to lose at the trade deadline, I see Sandy Alcantara, Pete Fairbanks, Zach Littell maybe, and Foster Griffin, Miles Michaelis. Those are the names that, Luis Garcia Jr., those are the names that don't have a lot of team control left, that could easily leave. But I don't actually see that making these teams fundamentally that much worse.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with the Nationals as well. We'll see what the season holds for Dylan Cruz, who we discussed at the end of our Monday episode as well. His surprising demotion to AAA. I imagine is brief. I think that young core is going to start to come together nicely over the course of this 2026 season.
Basically, I think, that's why I'm picking the Mets to win, is that I think the Mets, Braves, and Phillies at this point are veteran teams with questionable depth in some places, given a little bit more and a little bit less on different teams. But these are teams that basically can run it all the way and win it all if they get that health, like they get that good health year. You know what I mean? Like if everyone's healthy, any one of those three teams could win it all. But the flip side of that coin is if they have the bad year and there's a lot of health problems, then they could easily even just fall out of the playoffs. The Braves themselves last year are a proof of this.
Yeah, I'm taking the Phillies to win the division. I think it's because we're getting such encouraging reports about Zach Wheeler. I think when you put Wheeler atop that rotation with Christopher Sanchez, you bank on a bounce back from Aaron Nola, who looked good in the World Baseball Classic. It seems like they ironed out the pitch tipping issues that Jesus Luzardo was having last year. I mean, that starting four actually goes toe-to-toe with the Dodgers starting four for me when it's all working. So it's the high-end quality when they're healthy that I think that gives them that extra boost. Lineup is really solid. I like that Justin Crawford's going to be the starting center fielder to begin the season. They don't need a lot from his bat. They just need him to be a good defender and make the adjustments as a hitter and eventually be passable with the bat over the course of the season because they'll score plenty of runs with the top two-thirds. And the first 8, Turner, Schwarber, Harper, Bohm, Stott, Garcia, Marsh, JT Realmuto, like that's a great lineup. So I just think their window is now. A lot of confidence in their front office continuing to push more chips in. If it doesn't work out in the back of the rotation with Painter this year, Taijuan Walker, if that ends up being a weak spot once you put Wheeler back in, they'll go get a 5th starter. They've done such a good job with that bullpen too. The old Phillies keep losing close games thing. I think that's a thing of the past. It's an elite pen now. So I just like what they've done overall, trying to get over the mountaintop with that core. And I think they win the division in 2026, which is a little bit of a surprise relative to projections, but not a huge one. It's only a handful of games behind the Mets and the Braves.
No, I mean, like I said, it's a really well-established team. Even with a little bit of upside with Crawford there, Aiden Miller, their shortstop prospect, is ready to go at some point, even if he doesn't, contribute in the first month or so. I think he could be a big deal. He's their one-man depth piece if there's somebody on the infield goes down, I think. And then Crawford just offers you some upside if he ever lifts the ball, or if he just plays really well, defensively and makes the most out of his ground balls. That could be just embrace who you are and don't worry about hitting the ball on the ground so much. Maybe it'd be fine. So, I don't mean to pick against Philadelphia. I think, I like Philadelphia and the Mets. And I know it was my bold prediction, but I'm going to pick the Atlanta for not going through. Just because I think I have to pick one. And there's something I like about Senga, Peralta, and McClain at the top of that Mets rotation with, a real big bet that some of these defensive decisions that Stearns made are going to work out. And they theoretically should work out, because what he did was, how do you improve your defense in free agency? You buy guys and move them down the defensive spectrum. So you buy guys who are bad at defense at second and you put them at first. It should work theoretically, but it is a little bit of a look at the big brain on Brad situation that could just end up being really terrible.
I'm sure everybody will be very measured about it if it doesn't work out, as they often are when things don't work out for the Mets. We are going to take a quick break. Then it is on to America's division, the NL Central. All right, let's get into the NL Central. I like calling it America's division because, well, it's right in the middle, and it's beautiful. I think it's the best division in baseball. I think it's the best division in baseball every year. I have no bias whatsoever. I wish people would embrace the NL Central more than they actually do. By projection, Potere has the Cubs at 89.7 wins, about 7.5 ahead of the Brewers at 82 and change. The Pirates right behind the Brewers at 82 even. The Reds a bit behind that at 77.2. And the Cardinals all the way down at the bottom at 66.9, which, as someone who has been on the wrong end of a lot of Cardinals-Brewers games over the years, something about that doesn't seem trustworthy to me. Like, I can't believe that they're actually projecting that poorly. But at the top, do you buy that sort of a gap between the Cubs and the Brewers? We know there are some teams that, by their makeup, tend to be underprojected. I think this has described the Rays and the Guardians throughout most of the last decade plus now, and it seems like the Brewers are cut from the same cloth, so it really shouldn't surprise us that they exceed expectations, because they're not going to project as well as some of the teams that spend more and have a bigger veteran core.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I always want to be careful before I, make a team a model beater. I don't want to just be like, oh, well, the last couple of years it's really worked out for Milwaukee, so they must have something that the models are not capturing, and so it must be this or that or the other thing. I mean, just examples of things that we've discussed that could be it are how they structure their bullpen. They have a really good A bullpen and not a great B bullpen, and they know when to use the A bullpen, so they win the games that they're supposed to win. And the projection system just looks at the whole entire bullpen and says, it's an okay bullpen. And what it is really a great bullpen and a mediocre bullpen in the same bullpen, right? And no, I don't think that any projection system is actually simming out the use of the players. So there could be something there. Another one that I'm looking at right now, batting average on balls in play allowed since 2019. Dodgers are number one. We've long thought that they've really dialed in their defensive positioning. Houston's number two. Hey, there's another progressive team. Milwaukee is number three with a 279 BABIP. The median is 291. So they're getting a lot of benefit from either just having great defenders or from placing them really well or from coaching them really well. And I think it has to be a lot of those things. The Yankees, maybe surprisingly to some, are fourth in BABIP allowed. Sometimes they don't have great defense, so that must be maybe more positioning or pitching. Either case, I've listed a couple reasons that Milwaukee could be a model beater. They're going to rely on it as much as they do any year this year, because I think that this is an offense that got a little bit worse.
How dare you, sir? This is a team that has won a division 5 times in the last 8 years. They've made the playoffs in 7 of those seasons. I think they've firmly established themselves as model beaters for the reasons that you outlined. I think they're an elite base running team. They're a great defensive team. Their pitching depth is really good. They probably got 3 or 4 starters at AAA Nashville to start the year that would be number 3, number 4 starters in a lot of rotations. Part
of why they traded away Durbin. Also, if there's compounding effects for strikeout rate, when you look at batter strikeout rate, another thing that they do on the offense, at least over the last 3 years, is they don't strike out. It's their 15th in strikeout rate since 2022, and then last year was a great year for them. They were 5th. They had the 5th best strikeout rate as batters. That could have compounding effects. Where you're just always putting the ball in play, and maybe the projection systems aren't correctly accounting for that as well.
Yeah, and their base running value last year led the league, right? So if you're on base a lot and you run the bases really well, you're making the most of those opportunities. So you can make an offense that was light on power play up when you do all of those things. I think if something holds them back, it is still that lack of power, but I'm wondering if they can tap into a bit more of it. We saw Bryce Terang unlock more power over the course of the second half last year. It's not hard to imagine a scenario in which Chourio gets to more, maybe William Contreras with a healthier pair of hands actually hits for power all season long. So I'm curious more about the secondary guys. What do they get from Andrew Vaughn this year? He's had a great spring. We didn't really talk about it at all, but what if Andrew Vaughn changed something and is actually going to be a version of the player that the White Sox thought they were getting out of Cal over a full season for the Brewers? I realize it was a really nice heater when he came up and he cooled off a little bit over the course of the year, but there's a world in which Andrew Vaughn's an above average bat that pops 25 homers for them this year.
Yeah, I mean, the Bat X says 22 homers and a 109 WRC plus. So, the projections agree with you. It's a little bit more what happens after that. They don't believe in Turang. They think, these projections think he's going to be a below average hitter. And they basically say the Brewers have 4 above average hitters: Contreras, Yelich, Chourio, and Vaughn. But, just to, circle back around to the top of this division, they think that these same the Bat X projections have 8 Cubs that are above average hitters. And that doesn't even count Nico Horner. So, that's why they have, Chicago scoring 30 more runs over the course of the season than Milwaukee. And I think that Chicago has gone to work on the pitching staff and has really improved it. If you look at their pitchers, now they have some better stuff than they've ever had in the major league rotation. And while they have the Jameson Tyons, the kind of veteran pitchers that will get them there, they also have in Cade Horton and Edward Cabrera, young fireballers, and then Justin Steele comes back at some point. So this could be a really formidable, actually, 1-2-3 in the playoffs. And I think the Cubs are on the short list of teams that could win it all this year.
Yeah, I think the Cubs' top 3, top 4 starters could be as good as we've seen in recent years. I think it comes down to health. I think everybody involved in that group has had injuries. Cade Horton was hurt at the end of last year. Shota Imanaga looked like a different guy. I think it was a hamstring injury once he came back from that, but he looks really good this spring. I think a rebound closer to what he did in year 1 with the Cubs seems very reasonable. If Justin Steele comes off TJ and looks like himself, that's a huge lift for them. I think it's a little bit similar to what we were talking about with the Phillies, where it's like there's quality there if that group holds up. Edward Cabrera's injury history, well documented, definitely something to be worried about. Had an arm injury that he came back from at the end of last season, so all signs look pretty good on that front. But if they have an injury or two, I don't think they have depth quite like Milwaukee, and I don't think they have depth quite like the Mets. I think that would be one possible weakness for the way this roster is constructed. I'm with you on the lineup, top to bottom, being very good. I understand why the projections like the Cubs more than the Brewers. I just think that gap is smaller than the computer does at this point. Seiya Suzuki, by the way, will miss opening day. We've been kind of monitoring that over the last few days, but they do have Matt Shaw floating around as an extra bat who's going to probably pick up most of the extra playing time while Suzuki is sidelined. So I think the key here is just, does the lineup have a good health outcome? Because if it does, they're going to score enough runs to support a pretty high-quality pitching staff. Where are you at with the bullpen right now? Is this kind of the way you describe the Brewers bullpen, where you think it's A bullpen good, B bullpen not as good, but Craig Counsell's at the controls, so he'll manage it effectively and they'll get a better result maybe than the projections suggest as a result?
I mean, I like Daniel Palencia, and for the fantasy listeners, he's been my favorite, wait a little bit on closer guy in fantasy circles. But I think he is somebody that by the end of this season will be considered a top 5 closer in the league. And so I'm happy with that. They did go to work adding some veterans in terms of Phil Maton and Jacob Webb, and they also added, I'm trying to think of, there is somebody else they added, I thought.
Hunter Harvey, who's been oft hurt but has really top shelf stuff when he's not hurt. So, they've gone to work on this bullpen and have made it all right. But there's going to be some sorting. But Palencia, Maton, Harvey, as a group, I'd say still sort of back end of top 10. What do you think? Am I wrong on that one? I think if it's all healthy, that's a reasonable high-end outcome. I think it's closer to like an average unit, though, as a group. So, not bad, but probably an area where they're going to upgrade, maybe get multiple upgrades at the trade deadline, because it's a good roster. I think they are among the favorites in the National League, so you're not wrong for liking them. But this is a situation where I think everybody else in the division, especially Pirates and Reds fans, are like, hey, we're sitting right here. We're not that far away by projection. And I guess I want to know,
I mean, it's a virtual tie between Pirates and Brewers by this PECOTA projection, which is pretty eye-opening.
Right. Do you buy that? And do you buy the Reds being almost 5 wins behind the Pirates? Like, I know Hunter Green's going to miss probably the whole first half, but we like their starting pitching depth. And their lineup looks better than it has in a few years. Like, I kind of feel like the systems are a little light on the Reds, actually.
Yeah, but the Reds and the Pirates have a bunch of young players, and the young players are going to be regressed, pretty heavily to league mean until that they establish themselves as better than that. That's just how projections mostly work. I will point out that the projections are slightly different over at Fangraphs, where the Pirates have 83 wins. And the Cubs have 85, so they're clear there. But the Brewers only have 81, so the Pirates are in the playoffs, by the projections at Fangraphs. So that's going to be meaningful to me because I think two teams could sneak through from the Central. That's what I was saying from the NL East portion, is that I could see someone collapsing there, and that collapse would allow the Pirates into the playoffs, even by Pacoda.
I like where this is headed. I feel like this is headed to 3 teams from the NL Central making the playoffs, which is, again, why it deserves
That's what I'm
the
saying,
America's
yeah.
Division moniker. I think we are in for a wonderful summer if that's the case. And I look at this Pirates team, and last season when they fired Derek Shelton and replaced him with Don Kelly, I think the line on the show was, it's not going to change the fate of the 2025 Pirates. But what it did, it was, I think it identified the right manager for the job. I mean, they played a lot better after making that decision, and Don Kelly's sticking around. He's still the manager for the next steps in this rebuild. And I can buy them as significantly improved. I like what they did over the course of this offseason. I think they're probably right to give Connor Griffin a little bit of time at AAA just to make sure that he's, in fact, ready to go. They can call him up late April. They can call him up in May. They can call him up in August if that's when he's ready, and he'll still give them a boost. I guess, do you think this lineup gets out of the cellar and is at least, the 20th best lineup in baseball in terms of WRC plus and overall run production? Because it was lean in Pittsburgh last year, so they have a lot of ground to make up if they're actually going to be a true contender and put runs on the board against some of the top-end pitching staffs in the National League, especially if you're thinking ahead to a possible playoff matchup.
Yeah, I mean, by runs scored, the Pirates projection, by runs scored by game, the Pirates projection is, where is it? It is
fifth from the bottom in the NL, probably.
Not in the NL. Yeah, maybe.
Which is probably around 20th or 21st overall. It's going to be low.
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to do the count real quick, but it's like 18th. It's tied with the Rangers and just a decimal point behind the Padres and Twins. The Padres, Twins, Tigers, Rangers, and Reds all have equivalent offenses by this and are only a little bit behind the Mariners. So it could be just enough offense. I mean, but that's the big change for them, is they scored the fewest amount of runs in baseball last year, 3.6 per game. You cannot win a lot of games doing that. So even moving from last to, 20th or 19th would be a big deal. However, what we have seen is that it's really hard for a team to have success in the playoffs with a below average offense. That's a pretty easy top line finding from anybody who's looked at the subject. So they'll need to outperform their projections to have some success in the playoffs. But just making the playoffs would be a huge first step for them. I think some of their signings in the field were smart. I think some of the trades they made were smart. I think it was time for them to make a trade like the Mike Burrows for Brandon Lau and Jake Magnum trade, because that helped them in the bullpen with Mason Montgomery. It helped them in the outfield with Mangum, who is a good defender and makes a lot of contact and is pretty much an ideal fourth outfielder type that, maybe he'll play a lot, but that's something that can help them in their outfield depth. And then Brandon Lau is the most impactful bat that they signed, that they acquired this offseason. And it is only a 1-year deal, but hey, sometimes you got to take a chance at some point and do something like that. And that's what so I like that they did that. And then the 1-year deals of guys like Ryan O'Hearn and stuff, that's what they were supposed to be doing. It would have been nicer if they'd gotten Suarez as well. Gino Suarez, they were the finalists for him. It might have been nicer if they'd, spent a little bit more and pushed into, getting a Bregman or somebody like that. But I'll give them a pretty good grade for the offseason. And I just wanted to point out that people wanted me to bold predict the Pirates into the playoffs. And I had to say, it's not that bold a prediction. Fangraphs has them in the playoffs by projections. And even Pacoda has them out of the playoffs by 2 games or 3 games.
Yeah, I think they're a wild card contender. I don't think they're a division contender for me. And I do think the projections may have had a few IPAs with the boys before spitting out those numbers. That's the vibe I get. It's like weird. People are on the Pirates. That doesn't happen very often.
Well, I mean, they went to work, man. It's a different roster than last year, and some of those guys are older, and Connor Griffin's closer, and so you'll have it. Maybe they'll get slow out of the gate and everyone will, forget about them. But, it's a better team this year.
All right, let's get to the Cardinals real quick. I mentioned up top minor fears that they're not actually as bad as the projections suggest, but would you like to make a case that they are, in fact, as bad as the projections suggest?
I think a lot of their young hitters that are already in the big leagues have flaws. So Jordan Walker may not work out. Victor Scott may be a really bad hitter. Nolan Gorman may strike out 35% of the time. Alec Burleson may only be a platoon bat with weak defense. All those things are true, but one thing that is fun about this for them is that they get to figure out if those are true this year. So, yes, they'll play all those guys, and if all those questions are answered in the negative, then the Cincinnati, then since St. Louis is going to lose 100 games. But they are actually underrated. I think there's something about the Cardinals way that is true, which is that they try to produce well-rounded players. I think they're about competitiveness in the minors in a good way. I think they produce players that are pretty much ready to play in the big leagues, and they've done a really good job. I think the Cardinals, Rangers, and Yankees have created the most big leaguers over the last 10 years, So, they do a good job of drafting, scouting, acquiring players and developing them. And now they're going to add, joining this century in terms of, the tech and data aspect of it and doing it a little bit more on the pitching side. Some of that we might have already seen in the spring training with Liberator and Dustin May and Richard Fitz being among the biggest increasers in Stuff Plus in the spring. I think that maybe we're already seeing some benefits to their coaching. So I think that they're not going to lose 95 games. I think that they're going to win 75, 76 games, and they're going to keep the whole division tighter because they're going to be better than people think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Roster Resource has Nelson Velasquez, remember that name, as a starter for them in left field, and he had a great spring, so it's worth taking a look to see if he can get it going with a regular run of playing time to begin this season. But the top 6 in this lineup might not be bad. At least the top 4 is going to be solid. That's under the assumption that J.J. Weatherholt's in that group. I think Mason Wynn played on bad knee last year. If he's healthy, he could take a step forward. Alec Burleson's solid. Ivan Herrera's underrated. You're right to call up the questions about Gorman and Walker. There's a chance that they're just not everyday players, and those are spots that you have to turn over to someone else, but they have a few prospects on the horizon. Joshua Baez is a name we have not talked a lot about on the show. He might be close to breaking through as well. That could be the solution, maybe in center field, where Victor Scott slides into a bench role. So I just see a few paths for him to get better. Even Nathan Church, who projects to be on the bench by Roster Resource, I think he's a deep sleeper of our buddy James Anderson. He could actually play and have a little bit of a meaningful role this year as well. So the position player group looks pretty good. The pitching might be a little further away. Liam Doyle, not that far off. Quinn Matthews, kind of interesting. You mentioned Libertor and Dustin May as at least 2 possible
Fitz
current
is right
sleepers.
there. Yeah.
Fitz is right there too, and the bullpen might not be terrible. We've called them out as a group that could exceed expectations. So I'm looking at them as one of those projected last place teams that will be a bit of a pain at various points in the season for the other teams in the division. Would not surprise me if they're a little bit better than expected.
And I think they're kind of an argument against doing full rebuilds. I mean, if you let yourself go so fallow in as they have in Washington, then you have so much work to do to improve systems and to just have data in front of the players and do things that everyone else does. Whereas the Cardinals have a very good baseline and they never lose as many games as you think they're going to lose when they're bad. They don't do full rebuilds and then they're back online again. They're a little bit like the A's where they never get fully all the way bad and they usually, turn things around quickly. And I can see why, because I don't think that the answers are going to be negative on all of Gorman, Wynn, Scott, and Walker. I think that at least 1 or 2 of those is going to turn into an everyday above average player over the course of this year.
And Newbar, part of that too. He's hurt right now with the heel injuries, but once he comes back, they're going to find at least 1 regular out of those 3 holdovers from the last regime. Who wins this division? You taking the Cubs?
Yeah, I can't pick against the Cubs.
Yeah, I waffled on it pretty good. Thought I was going to pick the Brewers again this year. No one picked the Brewers last year, apparently, but I actually did. I didn't have good reasoning, but I just said, I don't know how they're going to do it. They're going to find a way. I'm going to take the Cubs this year. I do think the Brewers are a playoff team, but I think the Cubs win the division by a closer margin than the projections of Pacoda are calling for. I think those two series, the one that's end of August, beginning of September, and then the one that begins on Labor Day, circle those. That's probably going to decide the NL Central between the Brewers and Cubs this year. Let's shift the focus now to the NL West, where the Dodgers have a meaty 103 win projection from Pacoda. Just seems like a massive number given what we know about how they want to handle injuries. If they have injury problems, they're going to treat them conservatively because they can, right? So even if they don't get to that total, the question comes from the gap between the Dodgers and the field. Is there any world in which we see a repeat of last season where the Dodgers are actually sweating out a division title in 2026?
That, of course, it's possible because the way the Dodgers are built, they've built at least, I'd say like very fundamentally with older players. And, there's a lot of free agents on this team and there's a lot of injury risk. We already have Blake Snell, begging out of the first month. Tyler Glass now is going to miss some time at some point. Yamamoto just pitched the most innings of his life and was the guy on the field for the last out in the World Series. So like I could see him, grabbing a hamstring or something. So with those, that's sort of how it happened last year. Was there was a bunch of injuries, a bunch of people hurt, and they went into a bit of a tailspin, and the Padres picked it up. But my problem with that scenario this year is not so much about the Dodgers and whether or not they will get hurt or have a bad, a portion of the time, is that I don't see a contender in the division. I don't see a division mate that is going to play well enough to make them sweat. In fact, if I were to turn this into a bold prediction, I would say is it possible to have only one team above 500 in a division? I don't know if the math works out, but if it was possible, I think that this division could end up doing that. But maybe the math works out that you actually have to have at least a second one because they all play each other a bunch of times. Any case, I mean, San Francisco's done some work. It's good-ish, but their bullpen is not good. It's not good. It's probably one of the worst bullpens in the big leagues.
Yeah, it's in rough shape.
I mean, one of the worst contending. One of the worst bullpens that's trying. Their defense has improved, but even with Bader, Adames, and Bailey, and I'm going to take Bailey out of it because he's one of the best defenders in the game. But with Bader and Adames up the middle, they improved about as much as they could in free agency in defense. But again, those are post-peak players. And so they're probably not top half in defense up the middle. So you're taking a team that I would say is below average defensively with one of the worst bullpens, among competitive teams, with a decent lineup and a decent starting rotation. So you're like slightly above average, one of the worst, slightly below average. That adds up to a 500 team, right? And the Padres are similar where you're like, okay, that is a really good bullpen. The lineup was below average last year. Maybe you can give them slightly above average. And then I would say that their rotation is one of the worst rotations among contending teams.
All right. So you've said a lot of mean things about the Giants.
And the Padres.
And the Padres. And
I mean, the Giants fans, I think, are probably nodding along in agreement. The Padres fans are flipping me off.
Yeah. The Padres fans, I think, feel consistently disrespected. And I understand the frustration.
I picked them to win it all last year. Like
No, you usually go to the mat with the Padres.
But now I'm starting to be out, man.
Now you're starting to ask some questions. I get it. I think the Giants' pitching's a little better than you're giving it credit for. I think the Randy Rodriguez injury was a huge blow because if he's healthy, we're talking about a probably top 5 reliever or something very close to it, leading that bullpen everybody moving down a chair. I think XX Mora in the Discord called out Caleb Killian as a name that is actually having a great spring. Former Cubs prospect trying to break through. If they can find a couple of guys like that surprise, a couple of pop-up guys, they could go to have an average-ish bullpen. Good A bullpen, maybe questionable depth. That might be good enough. I don't love what they did in the back of the rotation, right? I mean, you add Molly, you add Adrian Hauser.
It's kind of command over stuff with really bad injury histories. Hauser has already pitched a lot worse in Tampa than he did when he was with Milwaukee. It feels like a little bit of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, so I do think there's some questions in the back of the rotation. The lineup is fine. I think at least the top 6 is good. Maybe we get something more out of Patrick Bailey with the bat. Bader as your 8 hitter's fine. The DH spot's a little bit open right now until Bryce Eldridge is ready, I guess, but it's not a bad lineup. Like I think of the teams in the mix, I look at the Giants as maybe a little more likely this year to put real pressure on the Dodgers than the Padres because of the Padres' flaws. But it's not impossible. Like it's just one of those things where with the Padres, how much do you trust those depth options they brought in the rotation? Can they keep this team afloat until they get healthier on the pitching side?
Yeah, I think that is the question. For the Giants, I think the question is how good is the offense? You can look through it with rose-colored glasses and say, hey, with the Reyes, making all this contact, and Devers and Adames and Chapman providing the power, Ramos and Lee have some dynamism, and Bader and Bailey are the kinds of guys that you have in for defense most likely, but will pop some homers and win some games for you, so they're not the biggest holes you've ever seen in a lineup. So it's a pretty strong 7, I guess, or a pretty strong 6 with a big question mark at DH where you have a really good prospect, that could come back. And as much as I've been down on Eldridge, we don't have bat speed from the spring, but I did want to throw in a little tiny mea culpa, which is that Eldridge had a little bit of a wrist injury late last year. And so when you look at his max EVs and his bat speeds in the major leagues, they weren't very good. But if you look at his max EV right now this spring, 113, that's better than the 109.7 he put up in the majors last year. You can infer that his bat speed is also better. So maybe the wrist injury sapped some of his bat speed and he's a better prospect than I was giving him credit for. He did still strike out 38% of the time and he still doesn't have really great defensive home. But if he has good bat speed, he can still be a high K, high power, guy and help them at DH. So there's still some upside there with him. And I guess they're going to go with something like Gerard Encarnacion and Drew Gilbert or Luis Matos, some combination of those guys to fill the 4th outfielder DH spot and run maybe Arias through there some days. I know that they promised Arias to play second to get him there, but it's a 1-year deal. If he looks crap at second base, 3 weeks into the season, you don't care anymore about, the 1-year deal. You're just like, sorry, dude, you got a DH for us. It's not looking good out there.
I guess I'm also just curious to see how Tony Vitello and his staff change things up with the org. What's going to be different about how they approach games and how they prepare for games too. I just wonder if that gives them a bit of a refresh that also makes them a bit more competitive than people are expecting right now as well. I think both the Giants and the Padres and even the Diamondbacks all look a lot different if you drop them in any other division, right? You take those teams, those are good enough teams to be clear contenders in most other divisions. They just have the problem of the Dodgers existing in the NL West right now, and that's not going to change. As far as Arizona goes, the big knock continues to be the pitching. I mean, it's great that they got Zach Gallen back because without him especially, I think you could look at that rotation and say they may have been a bottom 5 group. With him, they're still probably bottom 10. I don't know how Ryan Nelson gets the results he does with the heavy fastball usage. It's one of the biggest mysteries in baseball. I don't know why Brandon Pfaadt isn't a little bit better. My expectations for him have been just too high in the past, I guess. But the relief corps and the starting rotation are both awaiting the return of key arms, right? I mean, eventually Corbin Burns comes back from Tommy John surgery. Eventually, A.J. Puck and Justin Martinez rejoin the bullpen. I just don't know if their pitching stays afloat in its current form for those guys to return and then help them make a move towards the postseason again.
Yeah, and I mean, Carlos Santana and Pavin Smith at first base is, I would say approaching a hole level. And then, their DH situation is maybe a hole until Lourdes Gurriel comes back. So they've got a couple holes there. And then Lawler's a question mark. I think he'll maybe answer it in the affirmative, but it's a potential hole there. Moreno was a hole there last year. I think he's going to bounce back. I think this will be a good offense, but without Gurriel and without knowing what Lawler will do, there's a potential for 3-4 holes in this offense. So not as good as last year. There's also potential for it to be better if Lawler comes in and Gurriel comes back relatively early and Pavin Smith is fine. Then all of a sudden you don't really have and Moreno bounces back. Then you don't really have a hole in this lineup, and they do what they do, which is, score a lot of runs and hope to win games, 5-4, 6-5, stuff like that.
Yeah, Ryan Waldschmidt can be a big part of the equation as the season goes on too, even though he's starting the year back at AAA Reno. So
it just feels like a transitional year somehow. It just, I think it's like maybe it's the Burns injury or something. It's just in their off season where Ketel Marte was supposedly on the block. That was weird. And the Gurriel injury, there's something, but yet they go and get Arenado, so they're not punting the year. But it felt hesitant in the offseason, and somehow that this is a transitional year that they're maybe more excited about next year or something. I don't know.
I think for them to get from one of the first teams out level to one of the last teams in for a wild card, it just takes the things popping on the offensive side that you described, and it does take something like Nolan Arenado having something left in the tank, then also the best possible outcomes with the pitchers they're relying upon coming back from injury, because there's not a lot in that system that's going to come up on the pitching side and support the group that they currently have.
They need to go to work on their pitching development. There is something going wrong there, and they need to work on it.
The other team we got to talk about in the NL West is the Rockies. It's not like something I dread as much anymore. It's more of just like, how long will it take before the new coaches, the new people in the front office can get measurably different results? Like, it takes a long time to fix an org, right? This is the deep rebuild. This is a situation you inherited where not a lot of stuff was working. The positives are that up the middle, at least at catcher, short, and in center field, you've got 3 good players, right? You've got Hunter Goodman behind the plate. You've got Ezekiel Tovar at short, and you've got Brenton Doyle in center field. And I think with better health, you could see those latter 2 guys bouncing back and being good players this year. And then you've got a few interesting guys like Jordan Beck. Charlie Condon starts the year in the minors. He probably finishes the season in Colorado.
He could be a major league player. Julian gets a shot. That's a little bit like the Gorman situation in St. Louis, where you're just going to give the guy a full year to tell you if he's a player or not.
Yeah, I think the key here is just figuring out how quickly the Rockies are willing to adjust to something that's not working in the new regime, and then how effectively they find something interesting to do with the roster spots that are unsettled. How good are they at playing the waiver wire game in the interim while they continue to work on their player development? Zach Veen could be a surprise this year.
They've been working at it with Blaine Krim and Troy Johnson. They've been acquiring some guys off of the waiver wire and doing claims, but it also requires you to be pretty sober about some of your own players. Like, decide if Ryan Ritter or Kyle Karros are players that you want to protect and you keep those roster spots, or decide that we want to make those roster spots open so we can see what else is around the league, So, that's so difficult. But with a new regime, they're not as tied to previous draft picks. They're not like, but we draft them in the second round and we really believe in them. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to be able to come in here with sober eyes and say, I don't see an everyday regular, and we need to be chasing that more than, somebody who can sub in and play third or first sometimes.
Yeah, I think much like my optimism about a lot of the other bottom teams in the league, I at least think they're headed in the right direction in the broader sense. I'm curious to see if they're right about Jake McCarthy. I wonder if part of their longer term goal is to say, we want 3 center fielders patrolling the outfield at Coors because it's so much ground to cover.
Should be pretty good defensive with Beck, McCarthy, and Doyle on those days.
Right. And then, that's maybe one of your first steps towards improving your run prevention. Just having a great outfield defense. We know Tovar can pick it at short. So there's still just a few unsettled spots here that they'll have to figure out over the course of the year. I wanted to see Adel Amador get the call at second base to begin the year, but I understand why you'd want to take a look at Edward Julian. Just see if on the big side of the platoon he gives you something that you can use 75% of the time. So they're taking some interesting flyers. They've got a nice little core. It's probably going to take a few years. I'd be surprised that they finished above last place, but they're probably not going to be as far behind fourth place as they've been in recent years.
I also like with their acquisitions of Tomoyuki Sagano, Quintana, and Michael Lorenzen that they brought in 3 veterans that have very different pitch mixes. And I think I know that you can theoretically model out how the different pitches are going to move in Colorado, but there may be a difference between theoretically modeling it out and trying it out. To some extent, they're like, hey, let's try out 3 completely different types of pitchers and see if any of them has, more success than people expected, more success than the model expected, so on and so forth. So maybe they'll come out of this being like splitters. We just need to get a bunch of splitter guys. Sagano's splitter was the best pitch of the 3 of the 3 guys that we brought in. So they're looking to learn, and I think it will take some time.
Are you going to break the pattern and choose someone else to win the division?
No, it's pretty hard to.
Yeah, you can't
against the Dodgers. I just said that there might not be another 500 team.
No, I just wanted to make sure you weren't going to waffle off that. It seemed like a pretty firm call that you were making overall there. But yeah, Dodgers winning this division, maybe by a slightly smaller margin than the projections suggest, but probably not sweating it out as much as they did in 2025.
Well, we don't have too many surprises between the two of us. I'm a little bit sad about that because there's always surprises. But, if I'm going to be Mets, Cubs, Dodgers, and you're Phillies, Cubs, Dodgers, and I still have the Phillies making the playoffs, and you still have the Mets making the playoffs, we both have the Brewers making the playoffs, there's only one team difference between us.
Yes, I have the Braves in. I think they're going to find a way to survive it, even though it seems pretty hard to throw that out there right now. You've really made a convincing case for me to feel terrible about that call, but I'm going to stick with my original call.
No, they're a good team. I'm just worried about the collapse rate. And maybe the Mets have the same collapse rate. Maybe all those defensive players don't work, and all of a sudden they're even worse defensively. And I don't know, somebody gets hurt, like Senga gets hurt, and McClain spends the year trying to figure out lefties, and Peralta's only okay. All those things are possible too. So I think what we should have almost is like a Mets or Braves for both of us, and then we could have a second one. So let's say for you, if the Mets don't make it, who would be your next one?
The Mets are out.
Like if you had to pick one NL East team, that's what I'm forcing on you to try and get you one more type of new team in. Is it the Giants, the Pirates, the Reds, the Padres? Who's the next team up for you?
I'd probably get on board with the Pirates if I had to. I think they're the first one out for me.
Yeah, so that's what I have. I have the Pirates in. So I just feel like I'm a little bit nervous that there's a lot of chalk here, and
yeah,
the season usually provides an antidote to chalk, but you just have to be reasonable and look at the projections and give your best opinion, I feel like.
All right, so I'll get the Phillies, Cubs, and Dodgers as division winners. You get the Mets, Cubs, and Dodgers. My wild cards: Brewers, Mets, Braves. Yours: Brewers, Phillies, Pirates. My NLCS: Brewers over the Dodgers. Revenge served piping hot, in the words of the great Ian Darke. I think that was when the U.S. Put one in on Ghana in the World Cup several years ago. I think it's time. It's time for the Brewers to win it all.
My bold prediction was Mets over Dodgers, but my more middle line prediction is Cubs over Dodgers.
Okay. All right. We are going to take one more quick break before picking our award winners from the NL. All right, it's award time. Let's peer into the crystal ball for another 5 minutes or so. Rookie of the Year in the National League. Who do you got?
I'm going to go with Sal Stewart. I just think that, we don't necessarily park adjust all of our numbers when we're looking at voting for things. And I think he's got this nice park, but he's also got this really great ability to make contact and make hard contact. He hit the ball hard 53% of the time last year with a 112.6 max EV and a 17% barrel rate. Those are all in really small samples, but a lot of them were mirrored in the minor leagues, and those are the types of numbers that predict future power. So let's say you give him a 250, 300, 250 ISO. 300 is pretty aggressive. Let's give him a 250 ISO. That's going to change his projections. That's going to give him a 275, 280 type average. He's going to have, over a 500 slugging. That would give him something like a 25 homer, maybe 30 homer season with, 10 stolen bases. Come on. I mean, if he does, 80% of that, he wins Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I think Sal Stewart's a fun call. It's not as chalky as mine. I'm going to take J.J. Weatherholt. Projections are pretty solid, actually, for a rookie. If you look, you'll see 250 averages from, I think, Steamer and Zips. They're in the mid-250 range. Good OBPs, like 338 to 342. Sub-400 slugs, which seem a tad light to me. J.J. Weatherholt has controlled the strike zone really well throughout his time in the minors. Kind of split last season between AA and AAA, so there's really not much to gain for the Cardinals by sending him down. I think he's the opening day second baseman if they do make a late decision to send him down. I mean, I think he's among the first players called up this year. Just a really polished player coming out of West Virginia. Lots of ways he can help you in fantasy. Lots of ways he can help the Cardinals in real life. And I think he's going to be a table setter at or near the top of that lineup as well.
The reason I didn't pick him was the quality of contact's a little bit lower. The hard hit rate is there, but the high-end max EV type stuff is not necessarily there. So I don't know. I would think he would have closer to a league average ISO. So, maybe a 400, 420 slugging. I think that Stewart could outslug him.
All right, you're hewing a little closer to the projections. How about the Cy Young Award in the National League?
How are we going to pick somebody other than Paul Skeens?
I'm picking Paul Skeens.
It's Paul Skeens, but I'm just going to say Christopher Sanchez because I was looking at the projected guys in the NL, and if you're not taking Paul Skeens, you're taking Yamamoto, who I'm a little concerned with the workload. There's some other Dodger pitchers that are possibilities, but it really is Skeens at the top. The only one that gets close is Christopher Sanchez. I like that he's had a good spring. He's kept the fastball velocity up. And he's just a pretty devastating pitcher. I like that he's striking out and whiffing a lot more guys this spring. I don't know exactly how, but if he just adds a little bit of more strikeout rate to what he's doing, then he can. And I guess any non-Skeens pick is saying he's either Skeens going to regress some, or he's going to have to take a breather for a month or whatever it is. I'm just trying to think of who else it could be because it's probably Paul Skeens.
So if you just look, since Paul Skeens debuted in May of 2024, only Tarek Skubal has more F-WAR. Skubal pitches in the AL. Christopher Sanchez is right behind him. So, yeah, I think that's a very logical next guy up for that award.
Paul Skeens has pitched 320 and 2/3 innings in the major leagues and has a 1.96 ERA.
Yeah, he's really good. That's my analysis on Paul Skeens. That's why I'm picking him to win the Cy Young Award in 2026. I do have a note in here, though. Here's what I did to spice this up. I think Shohei Ohtani is going to be top 5 in NL Cy Young Award votes.
And this is bold-ish because Ohtani didn't pitch an official inning in the spring.
Doesn't matter.
He did pitch unofficially.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. He did have one official spring training game. He did a lot of stuff around the WBC, a lot of lives, a lot of backfield stuff. And his one appearance was for 4 innings. So it seems like he's ready to go as a regular starter. I mean, he's maybe only 5 innings or something, maybe 85 pitches. But if that's true and he hits the upper end, we were talking about he's had 2 seasons with 130, 1 season with 166. If he gets to 140, 150 innings, I think he could win the Cy with a or at least get votes with a smaller number of innings, just because those might be really excellent innings.
I think that's my expectation built in, and I also think that by pitching every 5th or 6th day, there's going to be just a little something taken off of the offensive totals. We saw the stolen bases go way down last year. That was a result of the shoulder injury that he suffered in the 2024 postseason. So I'm not expecting the bags to come back regardless of how much he's pitching. I think the offensive performance comes down in terms of volume, in terms of power output per game, just a little bit. There's no way that throwing 140 or 150 innings doesn't fatigue you in some way. It has to cost you something, no matter who you are, right? So with that, I'll go a little bit off script for the MVP prediction in the NL. I'm going to say Kyle Tucker actually wins the NL MVP this year. I think Tucker just lands in the dream scenario. He doesn't have to be the face of the franchise. He gets to go in there and just play. And if you look at what he was doing in his final season in Houston, 289, 408, 585. That was only in 78 games. That was about a 45-plus homer pace, 20-plus steal pace. That's kind of in line with the numbers we're expecting from Shohei, right? So if he's doing that, and maybe he plays a little more than Shohei does over the course of this year, the counting stats will be even bigger. So I think it's just right fit, right place, right time, where everyone's going to say, oh, wow, the Dodgers were right to throw all that money at Kyle Tucker. He actually is that kind of player. I think he's going to prove the skeptics wrong here in year one with the Dodgers.
I think it's certainly possible. I don't know what his injury history means going forward. And so, with the Dodgers being such a good team with so much depth, they may err on the side of caution every time there's something that comes up. And then you may just not get the full volume that you kind of have to play 155, 160 games to win the MVP. Just because you need to accrue all those wins above replacement, that's how so many people vote, And so, that's a counting stat, My pick, Juan Soto, has averaged 160 games played over the last 3 years. He's been one of the best bats in the big leagues. It's not really a bold prediction except for the fact that Shohei Ohtani exists. And I guess the reason I picked Juan Soto, other than I think it's a totally plausible outcome, is that I wanted to highlight that as bad as his defensive numbers were last year, defensive numbers come in a smaller sample than offensive numbers. So even our best defensive metrics come in about a third of the sample. So when you look at him and you say, oh, he was a -8 guy in 2023, he was a -6 guy in 2024, he was a -17 guy in 2025, the roof's falling and he's a terrible defender. He's going to be a DH next year. I think he'll be a DH at some point, but that's basically 1/3 of a season. So you could look at those last 3 seasons, combine them, and get a better sense of what his true talent defensively is going into this season. That's why Oopsie, which I think does the most sort of regression and outs above average work, has the best defensive number for Soto and has a 7 WAR projection for him. I mean, 7 WAR wins you an MVP a lot of years. So maybe Shohei Ohtani is a little bit more tired, isn't as good at the plate, does get some Cy Young votes, but doesn't win MVP. That opens it up to somebody that's already at the top, like a Tucker or Soto.
I think it's also... we both know how ridiculous it is to think that if Ohtani is even getting Cy Young votes and he doesn't win MVP, it means something really weird happened at the plate, because nobody else on the ballot is going to have 120 or 130 innings of 3-something ERA.
There could be some voter fatigue. You could just imagine the articles. There'll be articles being like, I'm voting for Shohei Ohtani for Cy and not for MVP because you don't have to just give it to him every year just because he hits and pitches. Don't you see that? There's somebody who could write that article.
Yes, I know.
I could write that article, I guess.
Don't poison the well.
Yeah.
Don't poison the well with something you don't even believe. That's cruel.
A little cynical, but I mean,
very cynical. Yes.
But it's I think it happened. There is a real thing called MVP fatigue. If you look at Willie Mays, he should have won 3 or 4 more MVPs back in the day. And if you look at Mike Trout, he should have won, I think, maybe 2 more MVPs than he did. And I think at some point people will start looking for reasons to vote for somebody else because it's just more exciting. It's like, hey, let's give it to somebody else.
Let's give somebody else a turn. Let's say somebody else is the best player in baseball, even though the numbers say it's clearly one guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess both of us are being bold to some extent, not taking the chalk here, but Voter fatigue does exist.
Yeah, I took the chalk, I think, with Weatherholt and Skeens, though. I think Weatherholt might be the odds-on favorite in the NL. Connor Griffin's probably close if you assume a relatively early promotion for him. One more question before we go. We have both completed our NFBC main event drafts, and just curious what you maybe learned from your build this year.
Well, I think that, my bench is super weird, and, my partner in it, JH, he's really good at thinking about things week to week. I tend to play in a lot of dynasty leagues, and I tend to think of the bench as a place you could put a guy who could be useful later, maybe a prospecty type thing, or like he's not a closer right now, but he could be, and so I tend to think about things that way. But if you are playing in a really highly competitive week to week league, you're going to want to make 3 drops in week 1, in week 2. If you think about that, you're like, oh, so at least 3 or 4 guys on my bench should only be guys I'm only picking to play in week 1, because we're just going to keep moving. We're going to keep moving. We're going to move on. And so we picked Johan Oviedo, Steven Matz, Anthony Kay, Justin Sterner, and Gregory Soto, all on our bench. And Parker Meadows and Colt Keith and Nolan Shanuel were our last batters that we took. And I can't say that I love these players. I didn't take them because I think Nolan Shanuel is going to hit 20 homers this year. I didn't take Colt Keith because I think he's going to be on our roster all year. And I'm increasingly nervous about Parker Meadows' bat, even though we've talked on the show about how we like him. What I did discover through the help of JH is that Shanuel and the Tigers, and Keith and Meadows, have really great opening schedules for the first 2 weeks. And we're waiting for Bo Bichette to become a third baseman. We have Lindor on our roster, so we have some stuff that's going to be awkward in the first 2 weeks, before he takes over. But at some point, Bo Bichette is going to be our third baseman, and Colt Keith can either be a dropper or he can be a guy who's available to MI and CI that we can use sometimes and not use other times, right? So the way I thought, I was like, oh, we should be taking... Spencer Steer's dropping too far. He could have some value. But he was like, here's Spencer Steer's opening first 2 weeks of the schedule. We would never use him in the first 2 weeks. So would he make it through, or would we drop him in week 2? And if we're going to drop him into week 2, then we shouldn't even draft him. So it was a lesson in learning for me to some extent. I had my impact on this roster, and I feel pretty good about it. I described our pitching staff is a cocaine pitching staff because we are Skeens, Burns, Emai, Cole, Weathers, Mize, Peterson, Oviedo, and Kay. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons that couldn't work out, but at least we have Skeens at the very top, and at least we have a lot of pitchers for week 1. Anthony Kay out in Milwaukee, not a terrible stream of a type of a start. We're going to figure it out in week 2. So that's what I would say is that the one thing that is applicable to other leagues is if you're in a league that there's a lot of movement and people make a lot of changes and it's week to week like this, then you should look at the schedules and buy guys in the draft for your bench that you're going to use in week 1 and drop in week 2.
That's a good takeaway. I think the takeaway I had from ours, we were drafting from the number 2 position, also co-managing with our buddy JH, and I like the way that came together for us. I mean, of course, you get one of Ohtani or Judge. We got Judge. Took our ace in round 2 with Hunter Brown. Took a second pitcher in round 5 with Yuri Perez. So a slightly different shape of the build than what you had starting with Skeens. Trey Turner and Bryce Harper wedged in there in 3 and 4 as hitters. We waited on closer, but we waited until the end of the circle of trust. And I guess it depends on how you define the circle, but Trevor McGill was our pick late in round 8. Josh Hader late in round 10. We know Hader starts the year on the IL.
He's like a late entry into the circle of trust, I feel like. Trevor McGill this spring had like a 45% strikeout rate. He's the incumbent. He's healthy. The stuff is all there. I don't know. I think he sort of separated himself from Uribe in the last week or so.
They're both great relievers. I know Pat Murphy's made comments about not necessarily having one guy. I don't know if it's just a thing you say when you're a manager and you've got more than one reliever that can close out games. That certainly is the case there. The goal was really to say, okay, if we're wrong about McGill, by the time we learn that we're wrong about him, Hader hopefully is back from his injury. And getting the discount on Hader right now, if he is in fact himself once he comes back, Josh Hader in round 10 ends up being a huge pick for us.
And you could end up having 2 top 5 closers.
Might have a shot at 2 top 5s. Hopefully get at least 1 top 10. Worst case scenario, we didn't invest as much in closers as everybody else, and we're chasing a couple in fab. You took a few late shots like Lucas Erceg. So I do think if you're in a situation, which I think this is still very unique to the NFBC, where closers are just way more expensive than you like, try to build in plan A, plan B, plan C that you're actually comfortable with. And just know, like, you know, you may be weak in that category, but you can miss with 8th, 9th, 10th round picks anyway. I feel like that's a price point where if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And my team's not just drawing dead out there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, by the 10th round, your likelihood that those players make it to the end of the end of the year on your roster is already dipping close to 50%.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos Estevez went in the 8th round of our draft. Like, that pick already looks like it's in a lot of trouble. Dennis Santana went in the 9th. Ryan Walker went in the 10th.
So like Dennis Santana went ahead of Josh Hader?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't have made that decision.
Yeah. So even like Luke Keeschel, just on the hitter side, Luke Keeschel went in the 9th. Like, Luke Keeschel might not be that safe as a second baseman in the 9th round, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit like our Garrett Cole thing. In certain, also the injury thing. That's what's with Hader too. Is that like in certain leagues, yes, you know, you don't want to take somebody that's going to be out 2 or 3 months, and yes, they may have complications. But you know, Garrett Cole got on the mound and showed us that he can pitch. Right? It's more than Rodon has done. So Rodon went ahead of Garrett Cole, and we thought, wow. We get Garrett Cole as our 4th starting pitcher, our 5th pitcher overall, you know, in like the 8th or 9th round. It's a little bit similar to your Hader pick, which is like, you know, maybe we get this injury discount and we have another top 30 pitcher here.
Yeah. So it was just enough to where I felt like we were okay if we were wrong. And if we're right, the payoff ends up being pretty significant. It would have been great to find Brian Abreu on that team, but Abreu's gotten expensive like we talked about a few weeks ago.
And I think it's also an argument for being like pretty conservative early on, because the early picks are the ones that are more likely to make it all the way. And that's your foundation. So like for the first 5 to 8 rounds, I wouldn't want to be taking like, you know, shots and be like, oh, I really believe in this guy. I know the projections don't say I like it, that he's any good, but like, I really believe in this guy. Well, if you do that and you lose on that bet, then you've lost one of the guys who's supposed to make it all the way through so the first like 8 guys or so, or they're supposed to make it, 7, 8 guys, they're supposed to make it to your end of your roster. So you kind of want to be more conservative early on. That allows you to go off the guardrails later. Skeens allowed us to do Chase Burns and Garrett Cole.
Right. You got a little buffer from that pick. And if you used it well, then you're in a great spot with those ratios. We are going to go on our way out the door. Reminder, you can join our Discord. Shout out again to Bobby Lord for the new theme music. Thanks to the entire crew for getting us some new graphics and new logo, new podcast art. All of it looks really great. So let us know what you think of that in our Discord.
The trailer. It's ridiculous. Don't
the trailer is ridiculous. It was fun to make it. It's hard. I feel like a sense of gratitude to I think Paul was our videographer out in Arizona, and we did not give Paul, Carrie, and Roger much to work with. The team that was working with us. Like, we're not actors. We're not models. And the people that edited this together, William Davison did some awesome work on there too. Like, there's just so many talented people that made us look, I think, a lot better than we actually were that day. So I greatly appreciate all of their efforts. But that is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed it, drop us a like, leave a rating, or sound off in the comments. We'll see you next time.